Hello and a warm welcome to the ICMCI celebration of the International Consultants Day 2023. For those who do not know me, my name is Robert Bodenstein. I'm chair of ICMCI and I'm sitting in Austria. This is the day when we celebrate our profession and demonstrate the world the importance of this profession for economic growth and social welfare. ICMCI, as the leader in the profession, invites every year experts from around the globe to give comprehensive insights to management consulting. This year, we will start with a presentation of the National Consulting Index, already well known by most of you, a research about the environment of management consulting in our member countries. It is presented by Simon Haslam. After that, we will have a short intro about engaging consultants for impact, followed by a discussion. But let us start with the National Consulting Index. Simon is chairing the academic fellows at ICMCI, and he's a professor at Durham University Business School, and he's developed the algorithm and methodology of the International Consulting Index. Simon, I see you on my screen. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. Wishing you all the best for International Consultants Day. And I'm going to share my screen and introduce you to where we have got to with the National Consulting Index project. So let me just put the slides on the screen. Those of us who've worked together before will recognize that we started the NCI, the National Consulting Index project, in 2018, and each year we try and refine and strengthen the algorithm of the consulting index to be more accurate in understanding global management consulting markets. The nature of the NCI project is to have a way of estimating the size of a management consulting market in any country around the world. And we do that by taking some reference data for a small amount of countries and then testing it against a range of economic and social factors to try and come up with a predictive equation that we can then apply to many other countries. The reference organization's data we use is an organization called the Source Global Research, and you can see it mentioned at the top and the top phrase in that screen. And Source Global Research are recognized as one of the leading authorities in the world on the nature of the professional services sector, including management consulting. And what we learned initially from Source Global Research is that when you look at the global market for management consulting, it is valued at just under 228 billion US dollars. And when you equate that with the size of the world's economy, we see globally that management consulting represents 0.023 of global gross domestic product. Now, one of the challenges in doing any form of numbers around consulting is how different organizations define the activity of management consulting. And we all know that that is not an easy thing to do. So it's great to have the source data, and they have a very clear and consistent definition around the world. And that clarity and global reach is very useful to us. As I said, we started the NCI project in 2018, and we updated and refine it every year. And the route into this is that when we look at the relationship between a size of a management consulting market and an economy GDP, we realize that some countries have a stronger, more developed management consulting sector than others. And the NCI project and the National Consulting Index project, what we seek to do is to aim to understand the factors that account for that variation. And once we understand the factors, and those factors are robust in being able to estimate, we can then have a greater insight in how our consulting sectors work. Okay, so as a project, the NCI is about determining the relative strength of a national management consulting sector. And to do that, we develop a computational model based on the Source Global Research reference data. And each year we refine the algorithm by testing more and more factors and having more robust and exacting data analysis tests. And the goal for us would be that what we hope to do is, as a family within ICMCI, to have the ability to be the world's most authoritative summary of the size and characteristics of the management consulting industry globally and in the IMC countries. So it is very much about understanding, it is very much about estimating, and it is very much an ongoing project. Many of us were involved in the last year NCI project, National Consulting Index project. And if you were, thank you for your support. And the project has two dimensions to it. One would be the testing of the numbers and the creation of the estimates of management consulting markets in US dollars. And the other would be to pull together the trends and the dynamics, the characteristics in the various countries. And that report is freely available on the CMC Global website. And there is the site reference. If you haven't already seen it, it's there ready for downloading. And the product of this particular project that I'm taking you through today will be an update, a 2023 edition. So when we come to this year's NCI project, the data we sought from Source Global Research as reference data, we chose 14 countries, and those countries chosen to give us a spread between big economies, smaller economies, Eastern, Western, North and South. So we could have a sample that was quite tightly bounded, but also hopefully holistic enough to give us an insight into the variation that exists in global management consulting. No surprises that the USA is the world's biggest single national consulting market. But the point we're making here is not every country in the world has a consulting market with the same characteristics of that in the USA. So by using robust reference data, we then sought to test out the factors that could account for why some markets were bigger, some were smaller than others. And that's the basis of the NCI project. So the countries you see on the screen are the 14 countries which we within ICMCI purchased the data from the reference organization Source Global Research. And that gave us the basis for doing the statistical analysis. Now, going on from that, the method looks a little bit like this. We each year consider variables which we believe are worth testing to try and get some illumination into whether consulting markets are relatively strong or less strong. And this is an ongoing refinement since the work was started out in 2018. And we test these factors, these independent variables, by statistical analysis. And each year we try and do a deeper and more robust statistical analysis. And if you've been following the project since 2018, you can see how progressively year on year we have a high level of stats. And what I'm going to share with you is the result of this year's statistical analysis. And in terms of where we are in the process, after our time together today, we within ICMCI will share the data with each IMC, and we will share our estimate of the size in US dollars of the national consulting market for your particular country, and we'll ask a couple of questions. One of the questions is, having seen that estimate, do you agree with it? And many IMCs, many countries will have their own local data and local insight and evaluation of consulting markets. And it's always very interesting for us and the research team to appreciate where local knowledge differs from our algorithm. And then we'll also ask that, okay, if this is an estimate of the size, the financial size of a management consulting market, what are the characteristics you might expect and what are the trends? And it's quite interesting this morning when we're having this conversation with some of our colleagues. One of our colleagues coming from India would point out that in the Indian consulting market, an awful lot of the dollar value is channeled through government organizations. So the public sector and the vibrancy of the public sector is absolutely critical to the characteristics of the management consulting sector in India. And that would be different in some countries. It was very similar in some countries. So we are seeking to publish a final report and research paper later this year, and that will include the calculation of the NCI, the estimate of the size of each country's management consulting sector in US dollars, but also the aggregation of the characteristics and trends. And if we do that in 2023, and we continue to do that, we become an incredibly robust and strong commentator on the global management consulting industry as a professional body. So let's go into the equation for the NCI in 2023. Now, over the past 5 years, we've worked with a lot of data points, and thanks to Kazema and the team at ICMCI for populating the data, for doing the pulling together of these data. And we test these data using statistical experts against the reference data we have purchased from Source Global Research. And the equation on the screen is this year's NCI equation. Now, let me explain what the equation is saying. This time, to run the equation and look for the correlations, we moved from a linear, straightforward approach to a logarithmic regression analysis. And logarithmic analysis allows for some of the skew in the data to be minimized to help us give a more representative view. So the abbreviations there, the natural logarithm of a management consulting sector, MCS, involves recognition of the individualistic collective score on the Hofstede Cultural Index. It involves cognizance of the Index of Economic Freedom. It involves cognizance of the Electoral Freedom Index, VDEM, and it also acknowledges the size of a country's economy, the gross domestic product, and the final factor is the gross domestic product per head of population. And the point we're making here is if you are expecting to see a large management consulting market, the things that work in its favor are that the country in question has an individualistic rather than a collective culture. It has economic freedoms rather than restrictions. It has very well developed electoral freedom, so the voice of the people and organizational country governance. It has a strong natural economy in GDP, but also has a relatively high output per head of population. And these factors we play through and running the regression. And for those of you who come from a statistical background, we're always looking at the regression results. The R-squared value can see there is 0.927. And that's a very high degree of correlation between the equation and the 14 reference data points. And so what does that mean? We've got an equation. Okay, no equation on prediction is going to be 100% accurate, but to do 927 out of 1,000 is a pretty high level of robustness. And the p-value indicates the degree to which that might happen in chance. And the p-value of less than 0.001 means there's less in 1 in 1,000 chance of this stuff happening by accident. So we are confident, we remain confident that we refine the equation every year. Interestingly, there are 3 factors in the equation that do the real heavy lifting. And that's the final bullet point on the screen. The real heavy lifting on the correlation belongs to a country's cultural underpinning, especially individualistic rather than collective cultures. And HIDV is the Hofstede Individual Cultural Index. The VDEM index, which is the index around democratic electoral freedom. And the final one, maybe no surprises here, the size of the economy in the first place. So we've got a multi-factor tested equation, which we can then now start to apply to the countries in question. So what we seek to do then is to use this as much as we can to predict the size and estimate the size of a country's management consulting sector. But the equation only works as the NCI if each of these countries can give us the index of economic freedom, can give us the Hofstede score, can give us the GDP per population, and the electoral freedom index. And some countries can, and some countries can't. So the next step in the model was that Alan, my collaborator on this particular project, and many of you will know Alan Blackman as sitting on the board of ICMCI and also a professor. We worked and did further estimates of those countries where we couldn't get the full NCI data, but with the help of GDP, we could use the estimate that the GDP is across the globe a fraction. The MCSI, the management consulting sector size, is a fraction of GDP. And we used the NCI estimate that based on the NCI calculation, a national consulting sector value is 0.2167 of a national GDP. And that gave us the ability to provide insight for a further 22 countries within the ICMCI family. So when you look at what we've been able to do with the source global research data, running the NCI calculation, and then doing some further estimates, what we've been able to do as an NCI project team this year is to provide management consulting sector size estimates for 68 out of the ICMCI countries. And that represents a footprint of nearly 83% of the member countries. So we haven't got to 100% yet, that's the task, but we have done some real progress in being to illuminating across the globe. So the next two slides from me show the data. We need to use two slides because of the number of countries in ICMCI, which is a great challenge to have. And these slides will come to you afterwards. And the point I'm making here is when you see the slides, there's a lot of numbers. I won't go all through the numbers, but I'll show you how the slides are presented. So the first slide on the screen shows the countries in the first part of the alphabet for ICMCI. You've got the name of the country on the left-hand side. You've got the Hofstede score on individualism, the index of economic freedom, the democratic electoral freedom index, and then you can read your way across, and you can see as we work towards the right-hand side, on the right-hand side, you see the estimates, and then you see the estimate type. So on the estimate type, you'll see the words GDP, you'll see the words NCI, and you'll see the word source. And that means the estimate is either coming directly from Source Global Research's reference data, or from our NCI calculation, or from our GDP estimate. And let me offer you this. The most robust is obviously the reference data that we had to purchase from Source. Then we use the NCI equation to take that reference data and extrapolate it robustly, as we said, with that 0.927 R-squared value. And then to further spread, we use the estimation around GDP to go further. So you can see for the first countries in the alphabet, you can see the estimate of management consulting dollar value market size for each of those countries and how that estimate was derived. If I go on to the next slide, you see these data for the countries in the latter half of the alphabet on ICMCI. So these slides will come your way, and it's an illumination of the data sitting underneath the algorithm itself, and how we have used three methods of calculation to estimate the dollar value of a management consulting size in any country. Now, when you look at the table where there's gaps in the data, any gaps in the data get in the way of calculations being done. And there are 14 countries that we struggled to make any form of estimation on. And Alan and I are putting this out there at the moment, which means this: if we can get a good estimate of gross domestic product, GDP, for any of these countries, we can estimate the management consulting market size. If we can get data on GDP, Hofstede individualism, economic freedom, democratic freedom, using the standard indicators of democratic freedom and economic freedom, and GDP, we can run the NCI calculation. So we are always as work in progress, and we have a few gaps. They sit on the screen, and I'm confident that between now and the publication of the report, we can fill quite a few of those gaps. So what we're looking to do as a next step would be as follows: that we are going to share these data with each IMC. We're going to ask each IMC whether you agree with the estimate, and we are very interested, especially where IMCs have local knowledge or have estimates from other research enterprises. And we are very interested in the trends and forecasts that we in IMCs in geographies would have knowledge of. So I'm based in the UK, and I would have a far closer understanding of the trends and forecasts in the UK consulting sector than there would in any part of the world. So if we aggregate insights from various IMCs in different parts of the world and collate this, where we create in 2023 an even more robust and comprehensive summary of both the size and the dynamics and the prospects of the global management consulting industry. And our wish is we do that this year, and next year we refine the model even further and we become even stronger. So this is the project. Like any analytical project, it is work in progress, and our work in progress is to seek each year to go deeper and more robust and more comprehensive, so we paint a richer and more valuable picture to IMCs and to the consulting community that sits around us. So that's the NCI project for 2023. Please, IMCs, expect that you'll hear from Robert, Kazema, Rima, Alan, and myself with a sharing of the data and also a request for the qualitative insight. And everybody in the meeting today expect that as we reach towards the end of 2023, we as ICMCI are in a position of being proud to publish a really comprehensive summary of the sector as we understand it. And before I hand to Robert, I think we appreciate that we are in an incredibly strong position as a global professional body with insight into so many countries around the world, so many different dynamics in consulting, that we become a very revered and important reference point. So let me stop the share and welcome any questions and comments.
Thank you, Simon. Excellent job. And it's really good to see that you make significant progress in terms of having more countries in the index, and with regards to ensure the robustness of the model, because this is what we need to do. This is our task as ICMCI, to hold the numbers and to be responsible and accountable for the numbers, to demonstrate the importance of management consulting for the economy and social welfare. And actually, we get two different outcomes of the report. One is this NCI, the index, which is maybe not so important as the potential market size, because that might be the thing everybody looks to. But the potential market size is the outcome of having a good environment. If you have a good environment, the market size grows. And as Simon says, you will be approached by ICMCI in the next weeks. We need to go on with this project, and we need to be better and better and better, as Simon says, and improving the model from year to year, and demonstrate that ICMCI is the leader in representing the profession. So I'm happy to see some questions in the chat box. If I don't know if I missed some. Is there anything Simon can answer right now? We might
Robert,
have 1 or 2 minutes.
If I may, can I just acknowledge, thank you, the sentiments in the chat box, but also, Peter, your comment. And I remember a conversation many years ago where, Peter, you encouraged myself and the research team to go deeper into the testing and the regressions. And can I thank you for that provocation, because that's been instrumental in moving this forward. So, Peter, great to see you and thank you.
Okay. All the reactions are very positive. If you have not so positive reactions, please send them via email. If you don't have further questions, we can proceed with the program, because we are exactly in time. Next is a presentation from Tilly Harvey Godfrey. She has worked in procurement for over 22 years, 17 of those focusing on professional services sourcing across both the private and public sector. She has a strong focus on the value that can be added by suppliers and how organizations can look to improve their relationships. She currently works for Crown Commercial Service as a strategic lead for consultancy and audit services, responsible for framework delivery across central government and their wider public sector. And I'm looking forward to get some insight about the impact of consulting, and I'm handing over to you, Tilly. The floor is yours.
Yep. Okay, thank you, Robert. Can everyone hear me okay? Just a thumbs up. Perfect. Okay, let me just bring up some slides. I have tested this, so we should be okay. Hopefully you can all see those slides right now. Brilliant. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to have been invited along today and speak on International Consultants Day, especially when my background isn't actually from consultancy. It's more around the buy side, who procure these actual sort of management consultancy and advisory services. So I'm not sure whether that makes me a member of the dark side or the light side of any empire, but hopefully what I can do is just share a few insights today on my experience of what it's like to sit on the other side of the fence, just faced with so many of the pressures that suppliers and consultancies maybe don't get to see. And those pressures, such as regulatory, governance and policy, politics, goodness me, there are always politics, etc. So I want to focus in particular on what we look for when running a competition or tender, what we look out for when that supplier is on the ground and delivering, and just a few other points to consider when dealing with the dreaded procurement of commercial people like myself. So first of all, who am I? Thank you, Robert, for the introduction. I'm Tilly Harvey. I'm working at Crown Commercial Services, and we pretty much act like a trading fund of the Cabinet Office in His Majesty's government. I keep meaning to say Her Majesty's government. It's now His Majesty's government. I've been here for just over 3.5 years, and my principal responsibility is the effective strategy and running of all things that are consultancy, audit assurance and restructuring and solvency related, and that's via the use of large kind of multiple lot frameworks that are available for central government departments and also our wider public sector organisations to use, pretty much all of the civil service. What my team do, we design, we create these frameworks with the support of our suppliers, our customers, our industry bodies. The amount of engagement is phenomenal. It takes many years, and my cat has joined, apologies. And what we like to do is maintain that sort of in-depth category strategy with the intent to ensure that we get the best suppliers on our frameworks, a range of suppliers that span from the infamous strategy houses, the big four, but also we absolutely need that large selection of mid-tier and SMEs as well. We want to get these people on with competitive rates that any government body can have access to in order to run sort of things such as further competitions are direct awards. Prior to that, my background was in the private sector. I've held roles in the professional services space, that's consultancy, legal, contingent, interim workers across Lloyds Banking Group, and also AXA Insurance and the electricity distribution sector. So what is it about me loving procuring consultancy services? I think, you know, for a start, when people ask me, it's much more exciting than facilities management or stationery. And that's probably why I've worked on and off resource related categories for the past sort of 19, 20 years or so. I predominantly like working with areas of the business because you get to learn about some of the true challenges that an organisation is facing as a whole. So that problem statement on how to improve, whether that be a transformation program, a customer journey, or a chase for revenue growth. And watching that happen with the support of specialist expertise like yourself to get there is something that really motivates me. So I'm a procurement person that can strike fear into many suppliers' hearts, but I assure you we're not all the same. What I do try to do, and how do I try to do it, quite simply, is look to enable consultants to provide the best possible service, bring that best possible value, which I guess is pretty much in line with what we all want to achieve at the end of the day from both sides. And I think one of the most important things I've learned to enable this objective is both parties need to help each other in doing that. We need to help each other to achieve that success, rather than some of the adversarial type approaches that you may have, unfortunately, or typically encountered in other areas of sort of goods and services procurements. We have certain obligations on our buy side to provide you with a decent enough spec or a statement of requirement on what it is we actually want to achieve as a business, department or team. We need to give you accurate and relevant information on the problem statement. We have to give you accurate data, something that can always be a problem. And actually access to the relevant resources within that organisation to enable you to do your jobs. And without those things, how can we expect to receive that outstanding level of service from you that delivers a solution or that return on investment? So I've made, like I say, some high-level sort of slides and things like that, but just sort of going through the first point. How important is the value provided by a consultancy and what we look out for and what we do when appointing a supplier? So simply put, any decent commercial professional will say that value provided is very important, probably slightly different understanding of the term value in public sector versus private. However, there are absolutely some commonalities on the wider benefits that can be achieved from contracts in addition to the delivery of the service itself. So I just wanted to take you through examples today. Number one, knowledge sharing and knowledge transfer. Anything that will look to upskill permanent colleagues or civil servants in my case. How can we as clients have everything we need to have handed over so that we don't need to call on the services of a consultancy again for that particular element? Sometimes we do make that hard on ourselves by not having anyone to hand things over to, but looking at ways that this can be asked for at competition level is becoming increasingly important, and it's always good to bring that to life in tender responses. What and how will you dedicate that handover knowledge is absolutely key. We require support around our regulatory priorities and commitments, or in the private sector, those sort of mission statements as well. So social value, carbon net zero, the levelling up agenda, very big policies in the UK at the moment. Probably the most established one of those is social value, as it covers pretty much all of those areas. I guess for those of you unaware of social value, I'm just aware that a lot of people from different countries have dialed into this. Social value across public sector. This is an act that came in around 2013. And what it requires all public sector organisations and their suppliers to do is look beyond the financial cost of a contract to consider how the services they commission and procure can improve that sort of economic, social, environmental well-being of an area. So when we score our suppliers in a bid scenario, social value needs to account for a minimum 10% alongside other traditional quality and scoring criteria. And what we've done in the past is had some great debate with our consultancy suppliers, particularly in the last few years on this. You know, what is the perception of true value from a management consultant coming in to do a focused piece of work? Is it from sustainability initiatives they have in their organisational mission statement? Is it their commitment to resource projects in local areas, or is it voluntary initiatives they have across their organisation as a whole that supports the economy? We have some big schemes in the UK, for example, such as supporting prison leavers programmes, etc. I mean, unfortunately, there's no clear answer to this, But my advice to any supplier out there would be to review the bid and try to understand what the client may particularly be looking for in this scenario, whether it's on a local, regional or national scale. If in doubt, ask at clarification stage for more granularity. We should be, as commercial people, challenged on those sorts of things, and look to see what will comprise a good answer across the 5 sort of key areas, things such as COVID-19 sort of recovery, tackling climate change, equal opportunity, economic equality and well-being as well. Another area I want to talk about is that willingness to participate in market and pre-market engagement. Now, I'm sure I don't need to talk about the importance of pre-market engagement to you, but sometimes it's an element that I think we on the buy side can do better. It's always something we encourage users of the frameworks I look after to do, especially when the outcomes are not fully known or quantified. So I do this by articulating the all-round benefits. So what would I as a buyer get out of it? I would hope to get a better quality bid. I would hope to get a more competitive bid, and actually that more sort of enhanced delivery alignment, as there's more of an understanding of what we as an organisation want to achieve. What it absolutely helps the supplier and yourselves to understand is it something that you'd be proud to deliver, i.e. is it something that's worth our time to bid on? We all know that bidding costs money. Is the opportunity the right value for money? We will often in public sector tenders explain sort of the budget and what we want to spend on particular programmes or initiatives. Can you manage the risk with that client? And can you bring a distinct offering to that bid as well? So whether that is just specialist advice, which is niche in nature, whether it's supporting products or innovation, or even an alternative way of doing things. We've seen bids recently where the usage of AI or robotic process automation, for example. And sometimes if the bid's not written well, you don't see those sort of offers sort of shine through, which could be, you know, bringing more value as you go along. And I guess what we both get out of it is both customer and suppliers even better. So you've got that dual shaping of specification, or the statement of requirements. You've got a better understanding of the risks involved that could potentially impact delivery. It encourages innovation, I think, potentially on both sides as well. And it builds that confidence to create a mutually beneficial commercial model, along with, and it's always a big issue for us, that clear understanding of the contractual terms and obligations. The next one I wanted to cover was encouragement of the SME agenda. So contrary to popular belief, there's always an active strive to ensure that a large percentage as possible of awarded work goes to SMEs, whether that's directly or via prime suppliers that then sort of build their supply chains. When users of my frameworks require support in building the specifications, what we will always ask them to do is consider how to write a specification that is inclusive towards SMEs and not just the big guys. We'll encourage partnering where it's feasible to do so, and we'll use sort of senior individuals across the organisation and our customers' organisations to move away from that perception that the golden stamp of some very well-known firms, the well-known phrase "if no one gets fired for using X" sort of comes to mind. I won't say the name X, we all know who it is. And the last one is, well, that willingness of alternative pricing models and incentives. So a large percentage of the engagement I've seen from a consultancy basis are at time and materials. And in a lot of cases, that may be the right model to go with. But what we encourage our customers to also do is seek out alternative price models when it's right to do so. That can be anything from fixed fee, risk and reward, milestone-based payments, and even gain share type arrangements as well. And in the public sector, we're probably a little bit behind the curve in getting innovative in our pricing model approaches, but it is something we're getting better at. Much of it will depend on the engagement and risk profile of the particular engagement in question. I've seen examples of gain share type arrangements where around 15 to 20% will be discussed and agreed upon. And I've also seen models where 100% of fees are at risk. And you can bet the mechanism for that was devised by the consultancy because it would be absolutely watertight. What I encourage suppliers to do is discuss with the customer if there's an opportunity to do so around potential pricing models that they're reviewing and proposing to use. I think that's also where you can add a lot of value in shaping requirements and the structure of the tender. So hopefully that's given you a few examples of what we look for and how you as consultancies can assist us. If I just move on to the next slide. So when that supplier is on board to a buyer, what factors are important in assessing the performance of that consultancy? So this may sound a little bit textbook, but I like to categorize it into 4 main factors. So that's the aligning and cascading of strategic objectives down to the day-to-day operational goals. developing those relevant balanced scorecards for reporting, and key emphasis on the word relevant there. We want to make the reporting easy. Again, we want to make it relevant with a focus on agreeing those metrics that matter. And also finally, sort of testing and validating both the operational and strategic decisions throughout the lifetime of the engagement. Alongside this, we would potentially look at the individual performance on the assignment. So many clients will always try and discuss the ability to sort of swap people out at their own request in the event of perceived non-performance. I've seen that happen across several engagements, particularly in the health sector, when we were in the middle of the pandemic, where roles for consultants were placed in highly critical kind of areas with key dependencies sort of resting on them. And then finally, what we want to do is ensure that level of management where we're trying to limit any scope creep. So regular touch points, managing that engagement efficiently and effectively, that could be beneficial for both parties. Another question that I thought would be useful to answer is, are we at risk of making the process of measuring performance sort of too objective and scientific, given the range of services that sort of come through, particularly on my frameworks? I guess one area of feedback with some of our strategic suppliers to government, these are the big kind of critical frameworks that keep the UK going and the lights switched on, for example, is that our evaluation methods can sometimes be overly formulaic and a bit impractical, especially where suppliers felt they didn't have a real chance to demonstrate their ability at tender stage. So it's all a question of how scientific and objective do you want to get, and actually is there any danger in that? I could talk about techniques in game theory, and I imagine many people on this call faint at the prospect of introducing elements such as game theory to the evaluation of consultancy and advisory service. But thankfully, I'm not going to talk about game theory. It's very logical, too logical for me. But what we will do is closely monitor supplier performance to ensure that customer satisfaction. So as a minimum, we would expect our supplier managers or commercial agreement managers in each of the customer organisations to regularly liaise with yourselves, the consultancies, to maintain that compliance with commercial sort of obligations. Be that escalation route for customer concerns before we get into any dispute resolution territory. Ensure that ongoing sort of supplier stability by carrying out relevant checks and making sure that there's a financial stability or the security of the systems where potentially customer sensitive data is held. Establish that mutually beneficial relationship where sort of with strategic suppliers focusing on sort of market innovation and research and development, and just basically encourage that strategic alignment between the organizational category strategies that we create. We all have them, and also looking at the direction of the market as well. Moving on, the common mistakes that we can commit when assessing performance of consultants and how you can help us. So it's easy to forget the obligations that are stated in the contract. Sometimes the customer may need to be reminded to go back to the contract to understand what's been asked of the consultancy and whether it's still relevant and fit for purpose. Sometimes we can forget to look for that value add. I can't tell you how many times it's been the result of a CEO mandate or a minister direction. It's come down from very, very high up and something has to be done under extreme time pressures. That can lead to problems later down the line when the question may be retrospectively asked. So my advice here again is to revisit that contract, ensure it remains fit for purpose and that both parties are working towards their desired outcomes, especially if they have slightly changed in the eyes of a minister or a director, which it can do. More often than not, the access to these people is via yourselves. You hold those key relationships, but also having that strong relationship with commercial community issues and challenges do get smoothed out before escalation. And then lastly, even though this is a glaringly obvious one, we as a business can forget that one of the key components of bringing consultancies on board is to actually deliver value. You know, it can turn into a come in, do what you need to do, down tools and leave scenario, which is something that we don't promote. We don't think it's healthy. It doesn't lead to some of the areas that I talked about a short while ago, such as knowledge transfer. So it's trying to maintain that communication around those areas to ensure it's on the business's radar to kind of incorporate. Do we monitor our suppliers when they're on the ground? The frequency will vary from engagement to engagement in terms of appropriateness, but in honesty, it probably doesn't happen as often as it should. A lot of the engagements there because there are resource constraints internally, meaning there's insufficient capacity to properly performance review. We do put a lot of trust into our consultancies. In particular, we'll put a lot of trust into the brand and reputation of the firm use, leading again to that attitude where they know what they're doing a good job, leave them to it, the golden stamp of some of the big strat houses, for example. And also there's a lack of confidence on our side, particularly with some commercial individuals that should be performance managing and challenging. There's a whole perception that you absolutely know best, and sometimes those relationships can be a little bit strained. So I was thinking of a few examples without sort of breaking confidentiality. Are there any organisations that lead the way in appointing and measuring consultant performance effectively? I'm answering this more so with my public sector hat on. I've seen good, bad and ugly, sometimes all from the same department and the same team. BAYS, or the department formerly known as BAYS, are good at doing it. They create good contracts with explicit detail on performance management measurements. They've assisted many financially distressed organisations post-COVID. So there's a lot of detail around response times, adhering to government protocol, how quickly they can set up remediation strategies, for example. The Department of Health did a retrospective piece. So this was around a large T&M programme that actually hit the news headlines. But each performer on the ground was measured by the role description they were put into, mapped to a level of whether they were successful in filling the brief. Where it had not been achieved, follow-up meetings to remedy, replace, or even in some sort of cases obtain money back where the role had not been achieved or that the outcomes had not been achieved. The downside of that, it does take a lot of time and resource to do across both sides. I've also seen a few things on EU exit arrangements, so panel arrangements where call-offs were signed and performance managed on a cabinet office level. Those are more so agreements on a cab rank rotation arrangement. So if there was non-performance, they could kind of be skipped over. So I think the answer to this one is, again, it can vary. It depends on the competency of the team writing the bid and the time they're enabled to carry it out within to conduct a thorough assessment as to who is the best fit supplier for an engagement, along with that stakeholder who has a clear vision of what it is they want to achieve at the end of the day. So, is holding the consultancy accountable for previous work on an optimal way to reward performance? This is a question we get asked quite often as well. So in the context of what did they do well or poorly before, that's always a topical one. There's several factors that could play into that to make it a biased view. So for example, if a supplier has been awarded an engagement for strategic advisory on sustainability and did an average or poor job, that doesn't mean to say their work in the digital advisory would be suboptimal. From a public sector perspective, we're not allowed to express formal opinion on whether a bad or a good job was done and factor this into the next competitive tender. We do see a lot of sort of water cooler comments and things, but there's nothing formal that we have in place. I will say that all the departments we work with do open and fair competitions to suppliers that sit on a respective lot, but there are those informal views expressed at some point. If we were allowed to do this, would we? It's an interesting debate point. I'd like to understand the outcome of previous engagements and why they were a success or deemed to be a failure. You know, was there an incorrect staff put on the assignment? Was the specification poorly written? Was there scope creep or extended timescales out of certain people's controls? Why was the customer delighted? I'm just going to finish off, just very aware of time. Just wanted to go to some final observations. And the first is building effective relationships. So I mentioned earlier the importance of establishing effective relationships, almost in a tri-party way with the supplier, the business and the commercial team. Sometimes the perception is that we should treat the engagement of consultants pretty much like any other good or service procured, and it simply isn't the case when working with you. Certain engagements should be viewed on almost a partnership. You know, we all want those optimal outcomes and delivery, therefore working together to achieve that should be at the forefront of everyone's mindset. And I guess the other point is the level of public scrutiny. So from an investor stakeholder perspective, or the taxpayer, we have an obligation as commercial professionals to ensure that money is spent efficiently as possible. So people are now more interested than ever as to where taxpayer money goes. And unfortunately, consultancy does keep coming under the public lens as a place to easily attack, usually through a lack of understanding. And we've had to battle off several kind of inquiries lately revolving around how we measure the effectiveness of the consultants across government. And whilst we have lots of statistics of how areas have been improved, there will always be a perception of why can't civil service do it themselves without understanding the bigger picture. And that's kind of more an awareness point. So I guess just to end on, I want to share a personal experience of working with a consultancy that I think demonstrates how valuable and effective and good working relationship can be. And this was a while ago, well, not so long ago now, actually, when we in the UK were involved with the evacuation of refugees from Afghanistan. As a government, we had to call on our supply chain in response to a crisis that involved not just the movement of officials, but also some big challenges about where we were going to house people, connect those who've been displaced in a hurry, and ensure they had access to basic human needs. And with that, we had a bit of a situation where several aircraft were flying to 3 major UK airports, 2 of which had already declared a state of emergency due to the amount of people who were imminently landing on the tarmac, of which a substantial amount were women and children. And we actually had a duty of care to get supplies to these people who literally arrived with nothing, items such as food, tents, clothing, hygiene products, with a very, very small window and a time frame to bring these things together at the right delivery point. At that point, we weren't even sure whether planes were about to land, and we needed support in getting through to senior people in organisations, large retailers, supermarket chains, outdoor clothing manufacturers. We had a minimally organised structure. We're not very organised in government, who we needed to talk to without sort of duplication and wasted effort. It was starting to become a bit of a mess. And it was at this point we decided to reach out to a consultancy firm who had the right contacts across these organisations and a way to bring them all together at pace, while us as key government officials could focus on some of the other tasks at hand. And because of the relationship we had, because of the understanding of the requirement under those time pressures, within 8 hours, we had 3 articulated lorries of supplies on motorways between airports ready to deliver goods to thousands of people. Now, this wasn't a competition, it wasn't a fully written spec, and it certainly wasn't something where payment was expected, but that in my eyes was a demonstration of true value. Understanding your supplier's capabilities, having that relationship to ask them for support in a pretty unconventional way. And actually, because of that collaboration, it just wasn't the achievement of deliverables and objectives. This is something that actually saved lives. So I just wanted to end on that positive note. But thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to me. I hope you found it of some use. And I think, sorry, I have gone way over time. I don't know if there was time for any questions, Robert.
Tilly, thank you very much for this valuable input. Thanks a lot. As you said, we do have some minutes for discussions. It's so important for us as ICMCI to always, we are continuously thinking about how do our clients feel? What do they expect from us? How can we support clients? Actually, the whole ISO standard, ISO 20700, was set up to support clients in buying consultancy services, because we think the more we empower clients to buy consulting services, the more they buy. I would probably start to discuss with you about alternative pricing models, but it's not on me, it's on the audience. Are there any questions?
That would probably take all day, Robert, as well. So.
Yeah. Are there any? Yes, Simon, please.
Thank you. And I just want a clarification for me, and thank you for the presentation. Is gain sharing as a model a subset of risk and reward?
Yes, pretty much. Yeah, that's how we would view it. I've seen several different ways. I would say probably in the private sector, there are more savvy ways of doing gain share. There are some limitations in how you might particularly do that with a public sector contract. But yeah, we see it as a subset of risk and reward.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any other inputs? Which, Simon, yes.
Sorry, no, I've been let Peter go first.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Robert. Thank you, Tilly, very much. This is just a question to your last slide. You talked briefly about public scrutiny, and I can't help but remember that book that came out earlier this year titled The Big Con, referring to the consulting industry by Miss Mazzucato, and I was just wondering, and it made big waves even over in the on the continent. So I was just wondering whether that had any effect on public tenders or made life generally more difficult.
I wouldn't say it made it too difficult. I've got the book myself. I've not made my way all the way through it, Peter, at the moment. What we are going through in the UK at the moment is procurement reform. So actually what the intent is behind that is to make some of the way that we buy goods and services, all common goods and services, more flexible. There are some very rigid guidelines that have scared a lot of longer term sort of civil service commercial people. You know, they've got a very set formulaic way of doing things. You know, you mentioned something around a supplier presentation to them, which I think is absolutely critical in consultancy sort of bids. And they kind of pale and they think, no, we can't possibly do that. How do we do a scoring matrix? And you're like, but you want to see the people that you're going to be working with. So it's a constant battle. What we hope, and I think it's next year, procurement reform is coming in. There's a little bit of discrepancy around the sort of launch timelines, but that will give us a bit more flexibility in how we evaluate, score, communicate with our suppliers that sit on our frameworks.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question, Simon, and then we need to close the session.
Just very quickly, Tilly, small consulting firms tend to work a lot in isolation. And when you see pricing from small firms, do they get the pricing levels right, or are they all over the place? Because you would see an awful lot of people bidding to you.
That's a really good question, Simon, actually. So I guess it depends what they want to badge themselves as. So I've seen some SMEs badge themselves as comparable to the Strat houses, and therefore you'll see Strat house kind of day rates come through, which are, you know, fall on the floor high, as we all know. But then you have a comparison between sort of what we have a lot called business consulting, and actually the SME rates are a lot more competitive. So it depends what it is they're actually kind of bidding for, and who they actually see as their kind of competition as well. But I would say there's probably no one size fits all answer for that. It could be a very huge range. On average, I would say they are cheaper than some of the larger organizations, but not in every single case.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. We are sharp at the hour. Thank you for joining. I want to take the chance to invite you to Amman, to Jordan, to see you in person, to meet in person. And this is the first conference annual meeting we have since 2019, when we met on the Bermudas, which will be a face-to-face meeting. And I think it's really worth to come and to see you in person and discuss all that we have been discussing today again, face to face. I would like to take the opportunity to take a big picture from us. Husaima will take, so can you turn on your camera and wave into the camera and wish ourselves a happy Consultants Day, because that is useful for our social media promotions. Saying that, follow us on social media. This is where you can download the presentations and be informed about the next steps for the conference. So again, happy Consultants Day. Thank you for joining. It was great seeing all of you, and hope to see you soon in person. Bye-bye.